Coming up in today's episode.
It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
From being in slums, that's understandable. I mean, unless you've been there, looking at a picture is not the same as being there.
She walks outside with these 2 cups. She bends down on the dock.
Oh, no.
And she scoops 2 cups of water out of the Amazon River. I'm standing in the doorway, Steve, and I'm thinking, what exactly is she thinking I'm going to do with that water?
But he said, are you the right person to do what you do? And I said, absolutely not. I said, I'm just a person who said yes.
Welcome to the iBIBLE Podcast with Steve Cleary, brought to you by RevelationMedia.
Hi, I'm Steve Cleary. Welcome to another broadcast of the iBIBLE Podcast. I'm here with my friend, Christopher Beth from the Bucket Ministry, and this is going to be a great podcast. Welcome.
Steve, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about a lot of different things, maybe some relevant, some not relevant. I almost wish we were recording because it was really interesting. But tell us in a nutshell, you got an interesting name, the Bucket Ministry. When somebody first brought it to me, the first thought that came to my mind is kick the bucket. And I'm like, that's not what the Bucket Ministry is. I know that. What is the Bucket Ministry?
Yeah, so we're a very simple organization that is really focused on 3 things. That is Jesus, discipleship, and clean, safe drinking water. And we use a small portable water filter that attaches to any bucket, any receptacle, and simply provides clean, safe drinking water for over 20 years. So our name really talks about the use of the bucket with the filter, but it's probably a little more aptly stated as the filter ministry, but we are the Bucket Ministry.
Yeah, not as poetic.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I love the name, the Bucket Ministry, and so I'm going to, and for those watching, you'll get to see some pictures, but I want to flash back, I don't know how long it was, not that long ago, 7 or 8 months ago. How long ago did we first meet?
Yeah, maybe.
So you came into the office and you brought a bucket. Actually, it was in the springtime, so it was probably 8 or 9 months ago. And every time I go to Home Depot, and I don't want to do a pitch for Home Depot, but I end up, they don't have shopping baskets anymore. They have buckets. So I pick up a bucket, put my stuff in there, and I usually end up buying the bucket. And my wife's like, do we need another 5 buckets? And so, but you bring in one of these buckets and one of these filters, and you walked, the guy that was with you, Matthew, you walked across the street. And it was raining out, so the rain, the water is flowing down the street. It's all muddy, and you scooped up a bunch of water, muddy water, and then you put in the bucket, you put the filter on, and you filtered the water right then and there, and you drank it, and the water looked perfectly clean. So I know you're not a simple ministry. I know you're an amazing ministry, but the technology to clean water using a bucket and a filter, it is kind of simple, right? The setup is simple. I don't know if the technology is simple. How do you go from muddy water in a bucket to clean water in a glass?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The filter itself, the technology is hollow fiber membrane, which that technology is not new. It's roughly 30 years old because it was derived from kidney dialysis technology. So more or less inside that filter is a series of what looks like spaghetti or straws that have holes in them.
Those are the fibers.
Those are the fibers of the filter, and the holes are the microns that lets the clean water through at 0.1 micron. So,
0.1.
And it's an absolute 0.1, which means they're not a combination of 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. All these are certified to be 0.1 micron, which for us non-science guys, what that really means is it takes out bacteria and everything bigger. So of all the conditions around the world that people are afflicted with, from drinking unsafe water from a river, a lake, a stream, rainwater, whatever it may be, most of those conditions come from bacteria. But that filter removes typhoid, cholera, amoebic dysentery, Giardia, E. coli, Salmonella, as well as other waterborne diseases. So inside that filter are those straws, and you'll be able to see from this animation that there's dirty water flowing in through one side of the filter, and then the straws capture the dirt, the debris, the contaminants, or cooties.
Is that the official term?
It is. That's my term. on the outside, and then you'll see the clean water flowing through the inside of the straw and then out the other side of the filter. And it's, again, a very simple filter that is backed in an awful lot of technology and history to get to this point. And the company we buy them from is based in near Tampa, Florida. It's called Sawyer, and it was originally developed for camping and backpacking. But that filter is owned by a man and his family that are all followers of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
And just an amazing connection.
So we're going to talk a lot about, how these are being used. I'm sure the family, I didn't realize the family was Christian that you're buying them from, so they must get a lot of missional value out of their company and what they're doing. And I'm sure they treat you right on obtaining the filters.
Yeah.
I have seen these in action. It was great. It's amazing that one filter is not that big. I'm trying to think, for those of you who are listening, it's probably, if you put a couple cans of soda together, it's probably about that size and volume. How much water can you filter? Now, I know this maintenance, you have to clean the filter.
Sure.
Isn't it is it a backwashing type? Push it back out?
Correct. It's cleaned with its own clean water, and it's just backflushed once a day. Takes literally 2 minutes.
So you're creating the clean water to backflush the filter.
Correct.
So that makes complete sense. So if this filter, so you're cleaning it, using it, cleaning it, using it, how much water can it filter?
So it depends on the turbidity of the water.
There you go again. That's not a cooties word. That's a big word.
Yeah, that's a big word, but it depends on how dirty the water is. If it's like chocolate milk, you're probably going to get 250 to 300 gallons per day.
Which is more than anybody can use.
Way more. The average family uses 5 to 8 gallons, and that's a family of anywhere from 6 to 10 people. But if the water is clearer coming out of the source, it will produce more and could produce upwards of 500 gallons a day. Again, much more than any one family needs.
Yeah. And for how long?
So that filter has been lab tested for over 1 million gallons. And what that means for the average family with their consumption rate of 5 to 8 gallons per day is that filter becomes a 20 to 22, maybe 25-year gift.
So, it's practically, it's almost a generation. So it's a lifetime.
Absolutely.
For clean water.
Yeah.
And it's affordable. I know we're going to talk about the scale you guys are doing, so you're looking at me like, it takes a lot of money, Steve. But the individual filter is actually an affordable solution.
Yeah, the great thing about that filter is we can provide it in most countries, the filter, the bucket, antiparasitic medicines for the family, and 3 follow-up visits with a Bible in their own home or their own heart language. We can provide all that in most countries for about $50.
$50.
Which
so
is silly.
25 years of clean water,
yeah,
a Bible, some initial discipleship, connect them to a church, $50. Yeah, it's amazingly affordable. I know we're going to talk about when you serve 100,000 families, that number gets big.
Yeah.
But let's back up a little bit and tell us briefly why did you get involved? What were you doing before, and what caused you to shift your energies into? Because you're the founder, right? God gave you the vision. What happened? What's the testimony of what came? How did God bring this to you?
Well, that's a little bit of a crazy story, but most stories go into crazy at some point. But I had no background in ministry, had no background in serving people with clean water or serving people with the gospel. And I was a business consultant for better part of 35 years. So more or less for that period of time, I help people either make more money or lose less money.
Okay.
And really thought I would be doing that for the majority of my life. And maybe I would be allowed to go fishing when I retire. I never thought I'd be fishing for men at the age of 57. So one day my daughter came home from high school and she said she wanted to go on this mission trip to the Brazilian Amazon. My wife and I were like, she's been to South Texas.
And how old is she at this?
At that point, she's 15, 16, somewhere
Okay, so
around
that's
there.
young to take a trip.
That kind of a trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So we had this quick plan. We decided, okay, let's tell her she can go, but she's got to raise all the money. And this trip was like $3,500. So we say, okay, Savannah, you can go, but you have to raise all your money to go. And literally, Steve, 3-4 weeks later, she had $3,500 raised between friends and family. And Sherry and I, my wife and I, are like, what did we just do?
Was this an attempt at reverse psychology?
Maybe.
You know, you can go to college, but you're going to pay for it. I don't want to go to college anymore.
Exactly. And so, but what ended up happening is she raised the money. Now we're at this point of how are we going to do this? Because neither of us are comfortable with her making this trip without one of us
Right, yeah.
with her. So that became my job. But I want to be honest, Steve, in this process of making this trip and deciding that I need to go with her, my only marching orders that I had was bring our daughter home.
Yeah.
So I went just to be her dad.
Yeah, keep her safe.
Because prior to that, I had been saved about 4 or 5 years and really didn't even understand my own relationship with Christ yet.
Oh, really?
At that point, I hadn't been discipled. And so I didn't go there because I had a love or compassion for the Brazilian people. I simply went to bring my kid home. So we make this trip into the Brazilian Amazon. We land in Manaus, Brazil. We take a small bus ride to the river, and we board an open-air river boat with 12 other people that were sleeping open air in hammocks on the boat, and we go 18 hours into the Amazon basin. Most uncomfortable trip of my life. I'd never been on a trip like that. Plus, I'm now surrounded by all these people that are talking about being the hands and feet of Jesus and about all the other trips they've been on and how they've served and preached the gospel. And at this point, I'm like, I don't even know if I can speak this language, right? And they're talking about things.
You're talking like a Christian language, like
Yes.
a Bible language, not
even Portuguese.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we make this trip and we go 18 hours in, and on the third day, I was assigned to do these home visits. And I went with a pastor, and we were supposed to be telling people about what we're going to do in their village that day and then pray with them. And I had to do this the previous 2 days on this trip. So I prayed when I was in people's houses, but I prayed nobody would make me talk. I was so far out of my comfort level. So at that point, the third day comes along, and I have to lead this visit by myself. And I go across a small river and meet people at their home. They invite me in. I have to walk across this rickety plank that you can see in the picture now. And this Brazilian couple, they look at me, they're kind of sizing me up, and they greet us very warmly. And this woman says to me, "Are you thirsty?" And at this point, I was like, yeah, I'm thirsty. And I look around in their house, and I'm looking for a refrigerator or I'm looking for a water cooler.
Right.
But this is a house on the side of the Amazon River in the middle of the jungle, literally 18 hours from the closest big city. And they had no refrigerator. They had no water cooler. So I watched this woman. She goes in her kitchen, and she takes these 2 cups from a wooden shelf. They're cracked, they're mismatched, and she walks outside, and I'm thinking, must be a water cooler out there. Because prior to this trip, I had no idea that there even was a world water crisis. So she walks outside with these 2 cups. She bends down on the dock,
Oh, no.
and she scoops 2 cups of water out of the Amazon River. And I'm thinking, and I'm standing in the doorway, Steve, and I'm thinking, what exactly is she thinking I'm going to do with that water? And sure enough, she comes up, hands 1 cup to me, 1 cup to my interpreter. So I had to quickly decide, what do I do with this? On one hand, if I drink it, I'm going to spend the rest of the trip in the bathroom.
Right.
And if I don't, she's going to think I'm rude because I just made a big deal how thirsty I was.
Yep.
So my interpreter is standing next to me. His name is Nelson. And I look at him, and he's got his hand underneath his arm, and he's wagging it. Don't do that. So now I realize I can't drink this water, but I also realize this is all these people have to drink, and they think this is normal.
Mm-hmm.
So at that very moment, I'm holding this glass of dirty water, and things are swimming in it. And I will tell you, prior to this day, if I ever heard somebody say, well, I got a word from God today, or I got some instruction from God today, and I'm not proud of this moment, Steve, but I will tell you my reaction was, really? He stopped his day to give you some instruction? But I'm sitting here holding this glass of dirty water, and I clearly heard 2 words, and he said, help them. But it came with no instruction. I didn't know what help them meant. I didn't know if that meant, am I supposed to give them $20? Am I supposed to cook them dinner? Mm-hmm. So I left there that day with this burden of help them. But what I like to think about now is that day in 2012 in that house, I got to witness the world water crisis. I got to understand how big the problem is. Also, in that day in 2012, God breathed life into the bucket ministry, and he showed me why he'd created me.
Wow. This is quite a story. I mean, I've heard it, but it's impacting. You know, you hear it again and again, and God does work in crazy ways. My favorite part of the story, and because I look at, you know, people saying that God gave them a vision or something, is that he said, help them. You still had to figure out what that meant and how to do that. I was with one of my favorite Bible teachers, Bruce Wilkinson, recently, and he said, don't delegate up. Mm-hmm. He said, when God gives you something to do, don't give it back to him and ask all the questions. Just do it.
Yeah.
And that's what you had to do, right? Help them. You just had to do it. You knew it was a water crisis. So 2012, the bucket ministry is born. Did you come home and, tell people you're quitting your job? What did that look like?
No, I was still working at that point, and came home, started researching how big this problem really was, and started talking about it and telling stories about what I had witnessed. And slowly but surely, I got opportunities to tell that story to more and more people. And at the same time, I was researching water because I wasn't sure what about water I was supposed to do. And I was quite sure it was water, but I didn't know really anything about wells, biosand filters. And there's just a plethora of remarkable water filters out there. So I'm researching these things. I bought a lot of these filters. And then one day, my wife and family and I were at a camping supply store here in Dallas called REI. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the water filter area for camping and backpacking. And I stumble across this Sawyer water filter. And that filter claimed to be able to filter over 1 million gallons that attached to a bucket. And I thought, wow, this might be
It seems unbelievable, though, doesn't it?
It does. And frankly, I didn't necessarily believe the claims on the package, but I ended up buying 2 of these filters, and they were $69 a piece. And I remember Sherry, my wife, saying, hey, why are you buying 2 of these? And I said, well, this may be the solution that I'm looking for. So we bring these home. I start reading up. I read the lab results from Sawyer on these water filters, and I thought, this is perfect because in the Amazon, the water rises and falls upwards of 40 feet per year.
Oh, wow.
40 feet. So if you put a well in there and it gets flooded, it's going to be contaminated.
It's gone, yeah.
And so a well was not an option in that environment. And so this filter attached to a bucket, and I thought, wow, this seems perfect. It's inexpensive, it's portable, and I'm pretty sure if I can use it, I can teach a 7-year-old how to use it, right? And so in 2014, we decided to bring 80 of these back down to the Amazon, and that's really where God completed this story for me on what his plans were. Mm-hmm. So, Steve, we bring 80 of these filters, and we go to the first village, and I thought I knew everything about everything at that point, right? And I thought that this was only about water. I had no idea the gospel connection to this. So we set up in front of this first village of people. There might have been 20 homes, maybe 60 people sitting in front of me. I went through this presentation on how to use the filter, how it's going to make their lives better. I showed them pictures of bacteria. And again, I was so proud with myself at that moment. And I thought, okay, this is what help them meant. And so at that point, the rest of the team is packed up. They're on the boat. I'm standing there with my interpreter, Nelson. And this Brazilian man walks up to me, and through Nelson, he said, I'd like to ask you how you came to our village today. And I just made a joke because I didn't know how to answer. I said, well, that boat, that's how I got here. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no. Of all the villages, why did you decide to come to ours? So I thought, wow, how do I answer that? And I went back to why I thought I was there, and I said, well, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and we were instructed to bring you this gift. And the next thing he said changed everything for us, because this man is standing in front of the rest of his villagers that he lives in this area with, and he says, who is this Jesus? Mm. And Steve, my first reaction, and again, I'm not proud of this reaction, but my first reaction is, hey, somebody get the pastor over here, because I got to have somebody tell this guy about Jesus. And the pastor's on the boat. There is no pastor. And I'm like, I can't stand on a rock and preach. How am I going to testify to this man? So I decided to share with him my testimony of how I came to faith. And after I went through the story, he says to me, how can I have that? Wow. And I said, how can you have what? And he goes, how can I have this Jesus in my life? And again, I'm looking for the pastor, but at that point, I lead him through the process of praying to receive Jesus and repenting of his sins. And then the rest of the people behind him raised their hands and they said, we want that too. And I said, you still get your filter. Right. And they said, no, we want this other gift. So that's when God showed us the full vision of what this is that water filter, while it will save lives and it will make lives physically better for a long, long time, the water filter is only a key. And that key unlocks a door that allows us to build relationships with people. And we get to earn the right to share the gospel with them and hopefully earn the right to start teaching patterns of discipleship to them and route them to local like-minded churches.
I mean, of course, we think of the story, right, and Jesus and the parable and the living water. So it's amazing that you give physical clean water, but the call is to be living water.
Amen.
It's such a powerful story with that pastor. And I think in my own life that God revealing things along the way. But we need to do the work, right? You needed to be willing to go back. I had one young person once, a younger person, I thought he was a little arrogant, but I probably shouldn't pass judgment. But he said, are you the right person to do what you do? And I said, absolutely not. I said, I'm just a person who said yes. Yeah. I don't know how many people in front of me didn't say yes or waited for more instruction. And it's really been on my heart how we go about God's vision. You know, he didn't give you a roadmap, and he just said help them. And then the pastor says, you know, that he wants who is Jesus.
Yeah.
Like the woman at the well, how do I get this living water? How do I get water that I'll never thirst again? So when I heard your testimony, and I remember, because I remember it was a very busy day. There was a lot of people in the room, and you were sharing your testimony, and everybody had questions or different things they wanted to ask. And I had to leave shortly, and I'm like, Christopher, what do we do? What do we do? How do we help? What is our role in all this? What's the bottom line? How do we do this? We love what you're doing. I mean, you cleaned water from across the street, the muddy water. I could give you a $50 donation and sponsor one. What do we do? Why am I here? Why are you here? And what happened next? And thankfully, I mean, you answered that question, and we started talking about. You had been introduced to iBIBLE, and we started talking about iBIBLE, the real story of Jesus. And when I asked that question, what does this mean for us? I really didn't know. I didn't have an agenda.
Right.
As a consultant that I've done in my professional life, I often have an answer, and I ask the question it's a leading question to move to the answer, and which is something you practice and you live by, but I really didn't know what the answer was going to be. And you started telling us about a program in Kenya. And I want to tell a short story. I've been to Kenya a few times, as our listeners probably know. I've talked about it. But I've driven through the slums of Kenya. And I remember, this is a sad story. I remember my pastor friend who was driving me through there. He said, there are hundreds. He might have even said 1,000. You'll probably know the answer to this. NGOs raising money for these slums. And I thought, wow, great. And he goes, no. He said, I didn't say they were giving them money. They're registered and they're raising money. I think it was thousands. There are thousands of organizations raising money, taking pictures of the slums, raising money, but keeping the money and not giving, or if they giving 5%, 10% back to the people that are stuck in these slums. And they're big. These slums are big. I mean, I remember driving through, and the roads, if you can call them roads, they're not really much of a road. So you told us about a campaign you were doing in the slums of Kenya. And I'm thinking, I've seen them, I know them, I know it's there, and I know the tragedy that so many people say they help them and don't. And so when you went to Kenya and you saw the slums, what did you see? What did you do when that was brought to you?
Everything you said is spot on, Steve, and even down to the description of the organizations that are registered to work there. There's roughly 13,500 organizations registered to work in the Kibera slum alone.
One slum. 13,000.
13,500 that are registered with the Kenyan government to work there. Now, we are told by the residents of the slum that there's about 30 that show up every week of the 13,000. The residents of Kibera, that slum in general, called those type of organizations briefcase NGOs because they walk up, they open their briefcase, take a camera out, take a bunch of pictures, go home, raise money, but they never come back. But they never solve a problem. Mm-hmm. So when I saw Kibera for the first time, if I'm being completely honest, I was terrified. It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
From being in slums, that's understandable. I mean, unless you've been there, looking at a picture is not the same as being there. And you go through, it's almost like a culture shock. You go through so many different emotions. For me, it was being in a slum, and depending on how far in, it can be anything from, compassion to fear.
Right. I got there and walked through that. Really, the second time I was there, I got to walk through that. And when I got home, my wife asked me about it. And she said, "What was it like?" And I said, "Well, it's awfully hard to describe, but I'll try. If I picture hell, that's what hell feels like and what it smells like. Maybe without the flames. But that place is the worst thing I've ever seen. But again, when I first saw it, it seemed way too big, and it seemed like something I had no business even looking at with the size of organization that we had. And just because it went on, as you said, Steve, it went on forever and ever.
Yeah. How? Let's paint a picture for those listening. How how big is it? Like, they're shanty, right? So the houses are put together with any materials they have. Could be metal roofing, it could be cardboard,
Sticks,
it could be
cardboard,
whatever they have. The slums are typically muddy because there's no plumbing, there's no drainage, there's skinny animals, skinny dogs running around, and there's a lot of people. How big is this? How many people? How many houses? And of course, a house being smaller than this room we're in, right?
Average is 8 by 8, 10 by 10, and there could be anywhere from 4 to 6 people living in that size of home. No running water in the home, no permanent electricity, no bathroom in the homes. And in fact, in that place, there's only 78 latrine facilities to serve 400,000 people. So Kibera itself is
400,000.
Correct.
So it's a city.
Essentially, yeah. In the middle of Nairobi, in the middle of a big modern city, is this place that most of us as Westerners would never be able to even imagine the poverty, the abject poverty in this place. But Kibera's 3 square miles.
Holy cow.
81,777 homes, 400,000 people.
So 80,000 homes in 3 square miles.
Correct.
We're in Texas. We have fields bigger than that.
Absolutely.
Right? And so you think about all of this. And I know the houses are like shared walls, it's not like this roads or alleys where you have a plot of land. And for the most part, it's very hard to get out of the slums once if you're born into it, you're not going to have a good education. It's very hard to have the ability to get out of the slum, right?
It's an interesting pathway in how people end up there, and I've been studying it now for several years. And most people that come up country into Nairobi come into Nairobi seeking prosperity, seeking a better life so they can send money back home. And when they get there, they can't find good jobs or really any job. So they have to find a place to live that they can afford, and this being the cheapest place. The average family in the Kibera slum makes about $26 per month per family, not per person, per family. And so a lot of these rental plots that they're living in might be $10 to $15 a month.
And that's what people can afford.
Correct.
And what are they doing for work? It could be sewing, cooking.
It could be odd jobs, a hustle of some sort where they might be selling something on the side of the road. Many of the people that we've served in that place, they end up walking 2 to 3 hours per day to a job somewhere in Nairobi. They might be housekeepers. They might be manual laborers. It could just be a variety of different jobs. But it's not like there's a thriving economy aside from people selling fruits, vegetables, things along the corridors there in that slum.
And so you're facing this, and I know, this podcast may go a little longer. Maybe we have to put it into 2 parts because I just want our listeners to know the work you go ahead of time. So it's not like you show up with filters.
Right.
Take us through the process of surveying this city, this 3 square mile city with 400,000 people in it.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and thank you for asking, Steve, because in some cases there is as much pre-work as there is the actual work during the campaign. So in Kibera, we looked for information on how many homes were there because our goal is to have 1 water filter per home.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the information on the internet contradicted itself. And then even the official government census, which they didn't do a full census, they did a small area, said that it was significantly more than what it ended up to be. So we knew at a certain point we had to invest and count every home. In order to do that, we used technology that we've developed called mission mapping, which lives on a GIS platform that allows us to map and collect data and show it in map-type settings. So we took a team of 60 local people that lived in Kibera.
Lived in the slum.
and we equipped them, trained them how to use smartphones with this technology on there, and they knocked on every single home and asked a few basic questions and then put a GPS pinpoint on every single home.
Wow.
So that took us, these 60 people, about 4.5 months to go through and do this.
They had to go to 80,000 homes.
81,707.
You know the exact number.
Yeah, it's etched into my brain. And so they knocked on every door for those that were home. The questions they asked were, how many people live in this home? What is your water source? What is your primary language?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk more about the needs to know languages in just a little bit. But we collected all that information. So when we ended with that assessment or that census, we knew something that even the Kenyan government didn't know. We knew exactly where and how many people, what tribe they belonged to, what was their primary language. And so we had all this data that we could then take and show donors and partners to help us fund this work. So that's the pre-work. And then we had to recruit a team that would do this work over the next 3 years, which was a little bit longer of a process. But the exciting thing that God showed us was the answer was not shipping a bunch of Westerners over there to do the work. Mm-hmm. The answer was right there in front of us. So we hired a small team of missionaries and pastors, like 7 that already lived in that slum, to start this work. But then as the team grew and as we received more funding to scale it larger, to complete it faster, we hired from within of people that already lived there in the slum, that were residents, that were followers of Jesus, and were called to be part of it. So we went from those original 7 people to a team of 100.
Wow.
98% of them lived right there in that slum, and 100% of them were Kenyans. So our methodology to work is neighbors serving neighbors. That's what we like to say. And that allowed these people to go faster. And there's parts of that slum that you and I would not be allowed to walk through.
And I mean, they know the people. They're of the people.
Absolutely.
You're not spending $1 million flying a bunch of Westerners.
Absolutely. So we were able to go faster, further because of that methodology. And so it took us 3 years to distribute 81,777 water filters. And then we did 3 follow-up visitations on every one of those homes that received those filters, checking on the filter, making sure it's running properly. But then we quickly transitioned into a spiritual assessment to find out if these people were followers of Jesus. Could they be considered born again? Had they repented of their sins? And if not, we shared the gospel with them. And when I say we, it's the local team, not me. But we shared the gospel with them, and then we started teaching in their home patterns of discipleship, which is where this beautiful relationship with iBIBLE comes in. And we're starting to teach using tools that after we met you, we could start using in their homes. And it just became this beautiful connectivity that we're teaching in their homes. But the whole goal is to route those people without church homes into local like-minded churches that we also assessed before we started the campaign.
There are churches in the slum.
There is.
So how many churches did you identify? I'm going to kind of do some rapid questions to kind of make sure.
368 churches, but we only consider 60 like-minded.
Okay. So 60 churches you felt were kindred spirit that could disciple these people. What was a typical response when you asked somebody what they believed? Did they know Jesus' salvation? Were they, because they could be anything, right?
Yeah. In that place, there's about 20% of people are Muslim.
Okay.
And I would say of that 20, we'll set them aside, and roughly 60% of the people we met were polytheistic, which to me means they have several gods on a shelf.
They're just covering their bases.
And Jesus might be one of them, and they're just going to take that gun down as they need it and use him appropriately. So very few people were actually following Jesus, were born again, repented of their sins, and walking what we see in Scripture as a relationship with Christ.
What's your best guess when you came into the percentage of followers of Christ among the 400,000 people or 81,000 families?
I would say somewhere between 25 and 35%.
Were already new salvation, new Christ.
Already believers, yeah.
And are they literate?
That's a big challenge in that place. Now, in an urban setting like Nairobi, we see the literacy rate higher than in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
In the bush, we see about 80% of people are not literate.
Wow.
But in Nairobi, we see somewhere between 50 and 60% of people are literate in that area.
That includes the slums?
Correct.
Because they have schools.
They have schools. You have to pay to send your child there, but there are schools there.
And you got to buy your own books and
uniforms.
Familiar with that,
yeah.
Clothing. So you had shared this with us, and I thought it kind of blew my mind because I think going to 81,000 homes, this is a big project. Like I said, it took 100 people, 3.5 years to complete the project. And then you told us, this was late last year, you told us you were starting another project. Tell us about the new project.
So at some point we knew we were going to finish Kibera. And because of the magnitude of that project, we had this team of 100 people that literally have touched a Sawyer water filter more than anyone on the planet as a team.
Yeah.
They have literally shared the gospel more than any other team of people on the planet just because the reps.
Thousands of times.
Easily probably over 150,000, maybe close to 200,000 gospel shares.
Across 100 people.
Yeah. So if you do something that much, you get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like Kibera for us was almost like a missionary trade school where they got practical experience to walk this journey with Christ. So we knew we did not want to say goodbye to them at the end of it. So about a year before finishing, I started praying over what God would have for that team. And he opened a door through a ripple of a recipient that moved to a different slum in Nairobi that's called Kawangwari. And we didn't know anything about this slum, but we wanted to take the same process, start assessing it, and census it. And later we got confirmation from the Lord that that's where we were supposed to move this team. But Kawangwari, we didn't know how big it was. We thought it had to be smaller than Kibera.
Did you think Kibera was the biggest in
that's what
the city?
That's what we were told. And that's what the internet told us. That's what everybody said. But nobody had ever counted them, Steve. And so we knew Kibera was 81,777 homes. But after we got done counting Kawangwari, it's 152,000 homes, 710,000 people.
Almost double.
Yeah.
What did you think when you started realizing how big it was?
The first time I saw the projections before we were finished, I thought it had to be wrong. But then I verified the stats, I verified all the data, and then my next thing was I struggled a little bit with my faith on that, and I thought, how in the world are we going to get this done?
Because you've done the survey. The survey's completed.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know your numbers.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed by how you rattle these off. I like to think I remember numbers, but you got some good memory on this.
Well, don't ask me what I had for breakfast. But so it became a little bit of a struggle in the early part of this for me, thinking about, oh my gosh, Kibera was about a $4.8 million project. And if Kawangwari is 152,000 homes, if we use the same math, all the same metrics that we did before, this is about an $8.3 million project to serve 710,000 people with clean water, generational access to clean water, the gospel, and to disciple them.
But you're doing it. You're starting. I think you started. We started 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, January 2nd. And the great news about this is, I believe if we're faithful, we're rewarded by being able to see God work. And one of my favorite quotes comes from Henry Blackaby: "Watch and see where God is working, and join Him in His work." Mm-hmm. So, $8.3 million sounds like a lot of money to anybody.
It is a lot of money.
And currently, we have raised nearly $4 million of that $8.3 million that we need to complete Kawangwari. So it's just been a testament for us to remain faithful.
The iBible Podcast with Steve Cleary, brought to you by RevelationMedia.
Join us in the next episode as Steve and Christopher continue this powerful discussion, sharing more about the life-changing impact of clean water and how God is using iBible and the bucket ministry work to open hearts to the gospel.
This episode was produced by Joshua Burton and Aaliyah Gonzales, with original theme music by Kibera. Subscribe to stay up to date on new episodes and iBible content, and visit the show notes for more information and resources from today's show.